This is how to crochet a hat using a hat template. Hi, I'm Sophia and I'm the creator behind Sophosaurus, and today I'm going to show you an in-depth tutorial on how to crochet a child-size beanie using one of my hat templates. They are available in 6 different sizes. You can download them for free from my website, or you can purchase a set from my shop and have that shipped to you. To get started, all you need is a template, a crochet hook, and some yarn. I'm using a 4.5mm hook and some cotton lightweight yarn, but you can use whatever hook and yarn you have available to you. And then I'm also going to use a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of every single round. This beanie is worked in the round from the top down, so you can use whatever method you prefer to work in the round, but to keep it simple, I'm going to start with a chain 2, and then I'm going to add all of my stitches for round 1 into the first chain. For round 1, I'm going to add 8 half double crochet into the first chain. If you are new to the half double crochet, that is a yarn over, insert your hook into the chain, yarn over and pull up a loop, and then yarn over again and pull through all 3 loops on the hook. If you struggle with pulling through multiple loops at a time, I would recommend pinching the slip knot with your middle finger and thumb, and then grabbing the chain right after you pull through, also with your middle finger and thumb, and then you can pinch it and pull it underneath the crochet hook to give it a little bit more tension and make it easier for your hook to travel through the loops on the hook. If you are new to working in the round, this is the easiest method to get started. You will work around the slip knot, as in it will be inside of your stitches, and you can work the tail from the slip knot into your stitches as well, and then you don't have to worry about weaving it in later. You can just cut it off. However, if you know how to use a magic ring, I would suggest you use it instead, just because the chain 2 creates a gap, which is not the end of the world. I'll show you at the very end of this video how you can easily cover up that gap, but you can skip that whole process if you use a magic ring. Now for row 2, we are going to increase every single stitch around, and to increase any stitch, you just add 2 stitches into 1 stitch. And in this case, we are adding 2 half double crochet on top of every single stitch around, meaning we are going from 8 stitches in round 1 to 16 stitches at the end of row 2. I am using a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of row 2 simply because I'm not slip stitching into the first stitch, and this is going to give me a seamless beanie because I am working in a spiral instead of working in finished rounds. If you follow me on social media and you've seen my crochet tutorials there, you'll know that I usually tend to ramble on quite a bit during these parts, where I've already given the instruction for the row and now we're just watching until the end of the row. I'm going to do it a little bit different for these longer videos, just so that you have a chance to focus on what you're doing. So I'm not going to count my stitches. I thought about that earlier, but if you're counting your stitches and I'm counting my stitches, then you have to put your hook and your yarn down in order to, pause the video so that I'm not distracting you. So for the remainder of this video, I'll be giving you the instructions at the beginning of every single row. The markers will be in the description so that you don't have to watch the whole thing if you don't want to. You can just skip from one row to the next, or you can pause or whatever, but hopefully that'll be the easiest way for you to be able to follow along. Now, if you can crochet with me, I think that would be the best case scenario, but everybody does work at their own pace, and I don't want to make you feel like you have to keep up with me or wait for me or whatever else other options there are. Just continue working at your own pace. It's not a race, and in the end, the winner is the person who gets the beanie. So there we go. For round 3, we are going to increase every other stitch, meaning I'm putting 2 stitches, 2 half double crochet into the first stitch, and then I'm going to add 1 half double crochet into the next stitch, and I'm going to repeat that all the way around. So it's going to be an increase followed by a regular stitch, another increase, another regular stitch, until I have 24 stitches at the end of row 3. If you are ever confused about what the stitch count is supposed to be, it is going to be a multiple of 8, simply because we started with 8 stitches in row 1. Row 2 is 2 times 8. Row 3 is going to be 3 times 8. And row 4, you guessed it, is going to be 4 times 8. So in order to keep a flat circle in crochet, you need to increase every single round by however many stitches you had in round 1. And the more evenly spaced out those increases are, the more likely your circle is going to stay flat and not start to look misshapen. Now, I do want to add that the number of stitches you start with in row 1 does affect how your circle is going to look, or how your hat is going to look in this case. If you are looking for a cone shape, or like something that has a tip, I would recommend using 6 to 8 stitches for round 1. If you are just looking for something generic, just a basic rule of thumb, I would go with 8 to 10 stitches. And if you are going to be creating a lot of large hats for which you would need a large circle, I would recommend starting with 10 to 12 stitches. If you are not sure whether or not you have the correct number of stitches, besides the cone shape and the flat shape, if you, let's say you're starting out with 9 stitches and you're creating a small hat, and you start to have ruffles in your circle instead of having a flat circle, you want to go down to 8 stitches, because that's going to give you more of a stretch in between the increases, and it's going to stretch out those edges so they're not as ruffled. However, if you are creating a larger hat and you only have 8 stitches and it's starting to curl up on you, then I would start with 9 or 10 stitches, because that's going to give you more opportunities to increase, and those opportunities to increase are going to decrease the tension in between the increases, which is what is causing your edges to curl up, if that makes sense. Now, before we move on to row 4, I just want to show you how to use the template. We are going to take our crochet circle and place it to the center of our hat template, and the goal is to match the edges of the crochet circle to the edges of the template. This is going to give us our crown, and that determines essentially the size head that the beanie is going to fit. Now for row 4, we are going to add an increase into the first stitch and then 1 stitch into each of the next 2 stitches. And that is going to be our repeat for the entire round. So it'll be an increase, which is 2 stitches into 1, and then a regular stitch into the next 2. So 2, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, all the way around. Now, I do want to talk about the stitch marker, simply because I get asked about it all the time, especially by beginner crocheters. And the questions generally boil down to, do I need stitch markers? And the answer is yes, 100%, absolutely, you need stitch markers. But you don't have to go out and buy a stitch marker. You can simply use a bobby pin or a safety pin, or a paper clip, or even just a contrasting yarn color to mark stitches in your project. In this case, I'm using a stitch marker to mark the first stitch of every single round, because I'm working in a spiral. If I was working in perfect rounds, meaning I was finishing my round after every single row, I would slip stitch into the first stitch and then use a turning chain to indicate the beginning of the round. But because I want a seamless beanie, I'm using a spiral method. And the stitch marker helps me figure out what row I'm on and how many increases or how many stitches I'm going to need for that round. And it also tells me when I need to stop increasing in order to create that tube shape. They are also used for counting. For example, in this case, I'm using it to count 1 row at a time so that I don't have to worry about the other rows. I just have to worry about how many stitches are supposed to be in this row and not the previous row. And if you were using it for other projects, you can use it to take some of the counting load off. For example, some people like to put it into every 10th stitch so that they can make sure they're not dropping stitches. I've even heard of some beginners really benefiting from putting a stitch marker into every stitch because it helps them practice identifying the individual stitches. Some people only like to put them into the turning chain so that they know not to skip the turning chain and therefore turn their rectangle into a triangle. And you can use it to count the number of rows you have in a project. For example, if you're working on a large blanket, you can use a stitch marker at the edge of every 10th row, and then after 100 rows or so, you don't have to start all the way at 0. You can just count the stitch markers on the side and count by tens. So those are all reasons I believe every crocheter should have some form of stitch marker in their toolbox. But now we are at row 5, and we are going to take the circle again and place it on top of our template to see how much closer we got to the edge. We're not that close yet, so we're just going to keep on increasing. And for row 5, we are going to put an increase into the first stitch. That's going to be the same for every single increase round. And then we're going to put a regular stitch into each of the next 3 stitches. This way there are 3 stitches in between each increase, and there is a total of 8 increases in every single round, including this one. And that is going to be the repeat for this round. So I said I wasn't going to ramble, and I want to keep this as short as possible, but I do want to talk about the origin of the templates because I think it'll help you understand how they work and what they're intended for. So the very, very basic part of the template is that you can use them with any size hook and any size yarn and essentially any stitch as long as you can work it in the round. And I did that because, or I didn't do that, that just is a bonus for me because at one point I had so much yarn that was donated to me from everybody's grandparents who passed. And some of them didn't have a yarn label anymore, so I didn't know what size yarn it was, and I could kind of guess what hook I was comfortable using it with, but it's really hard to find patterns for a yarn that you don't know the fiber content, you don't know what size it is, and it's hard to match it. So you usually I ended up making granny squares or just blankets or scrap blankets, and they got boring pretty quickly. And then there was the problem where I didn't have enough to make a blanket. I just had a little bit to make like a good size hat. And so that solved that problem. The other reason I created the templates was because I could not figure out how to make a beanie. I could not figure out how to make a hat to save my life. I knew how to read patterns, and I would get patterns for hats, or somebody would ask me for a hat and send me a pattern or ask for a pattern, whatever, and I would make the beanie, but I did not understand gauge. So if you don't know what gauge is, it is literally the size of your stitches. So when someone's talking about matching gauge, you're essentially trying to match the size of your stitches to the size of the designer stitches, and if they don't match, you will not end up with the same size project as the designer. This isn't too important for projects like blankets and things, but if it's something that is to be worn by somebody, it's supposed to be on somebody's body, then it is not an option. You have to match gauge, or your child size cardigan could end up as a adult size cardigan. That's what happened with my hats. They always ended up being bigger. So when my beanies never worked out, I tried to figure out everything I could about beanies and why they didn't work out. So after I figured out how gauge works, I looked into all the different ways to make a beanie. So you have top down, which is what this is. Then you have bottom up, and then you have side to side. And yes, you can make a beanie with like a panel. So I know how to do all of them. I have patterns for all of them that are gonna come out if they're not out already. And the most basic way to make a beanie without using a pattern was the measuring tape method. And I'll talk more about the measuring tape method after round 5 because I just realized that we're almost at the end. So in row 6, I'll talk about the measuring tape method just so we can stay on track. Okay, so now that we are at the end of row 5, we are going to take our crochet circle and hold it up against the hat template again to see if we match the edges, and we're still not that close. So for row 6, we're going to continue increasing, and we're going to add 2 stitches into the first stitch and then 1 stitch into each of the next 4 stitches. So it'll be 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Another tip for counting is I like to count 1, 2, go together, and then 3, 4, 5, 6 are by themselves. And you can just start over with every increase, because as long as you end up with a 6 for your last stitch, you are good to go. But for the measuring tape method on how to make a hat, you essentially use measuring tape to determine the size of your crochet circle. And the crochet circle is based on the crown size of whatever person you're working with. So there are many tables available on the internet that already have the head measurements available, or averages of such. And it also tells you how to take the measurements yourself. So you would take the measuring tape, you would place it around someone's head, determine the crown size, and then use that measurement to determine the diameter of your circle. And then once you reach it, you work in a tube until it reaches the bottom of the earlobe. And this is just a way to simplify that method. So essentially, I used multiple tables to create the average size of a child, and then I use that to determine the size of the crown, or the size of the template circle. And since it's pretty much going to be the same, I just left it as a circle instead of having to use measuring tape every single time. And then I determined the distance from the top of the head to the bottom of the earlobe. This is just averages speaking, so every single person is going to be a little bit different, but that is going to be the minimum length that you need for the hat. So all of that to say, the hat templates replace the measuring tape method, meaning instead of taking a measuring tape to measure your crochet circle, you take your crochet circle and match it to the template, which is the size the measuring tape should be, if that makes sense. Now there is a way to adjust the templates as needed. For example, I have met adult, mostly men, who have heads that are bigger than the average adult male head, so I had to make hats that were bigger. And I'll go into that when we actually reach the edge of the circle, but to give you the short version, you just make the circle bigger than the template. Not much bigger. You can determine how much bigger you need to make it, but you can also make it slightly smaller. So if you have a child that has a bigger than average head, but they're not quite teen size yet, then you can just go a little bit bigger than the hat template for the child and work from there. You can also make the beanies slouchier, and I'll get into that later. The templates essentially take you to the average size head and to the bottom of the earlobe, just barely. So it's the minimum length you need. Minimum is the key word. Now, while that is the end of my tips, it is not the end of the video. I'm still going to give you the instructions on what to do at the beginning of every single round or section. And if you want to crochet along with me, I am crocheting in real time. None of this is sped up, and it won't be. So if you want to do it together, we can. But I'm not going to ramble through every single round because I think that might be distracting. I don't know. You let me know. I mean, I can talk about things. I can even read stories or something. Some people have asked me to read children's books. I love Grimm's fairy tales or Hans Christian Andersen. They're just such good stories. But we are at the end of this row 6. So now we are going to match it up to the hat template, see where we're at. And we're getting there, but we're not there yet. So we're going to keep increasing for row 7, and this time we're going to add an increase into the first stitch and then a regular stitch into each of the next 5 stitches. and that is going to be the repeat for this entire row. So again, we have 8 increases and there are 5 stitches in between each increase. Now that we're at the end of row 7, we're just going to hold it up next to the hat template to see how many more increases we need or if we're finished. And it looks like we got, I would say, at least 2 more rows. So for row 8, we are going to add an increase into the first stitch, and then we're going to add a regular stitch into each of the next 6 stitches. So we will have 8 increases for the entire row with 6 stitches in between each of them. Now that we're at the end of row 8, we're going to hold it up next to the hat template again to see how close we are to being finished. I am going to guess we need at least one more row. Yes. So here's another thing. As you're lining it up, you want to line up the very edge of the beginning of the round. So that way you can see we're probably only going to need half a round of increases, but I'll go into that more in just a minute. So for row 9, we are going to increase the first stitch and then put a regular stitch into each of the next 7 stitches. So we will have a total of 8 increases with 7 stitches in between them. And I will see you at the end of row 9 because this is going to be our last row of increases. And I want to show you how to adjust it because we will have to adjust it. Okay, so here we go. We are going to still match our circle to the circle on the template, but you are going to see that our crochet circle is going to be slightly larger and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is line up the edge from the first stitch all the way across. So like this. You still want to see the dots a little bit, but not too much. And we're just going to follow it all the way until it's completely hidden because we have too many increases. So right about here, that's our last increase. I am going to pull all of my stitches out until I can get to that increase. So right there, and I'm going to just pull them out, hold my fingers in place there so I know where to stop. And what I'm going to do is I'm still going to finish the row, but I'm no longer increasing. So this is just going to be one regular stitch all the way around, or all the way until the stitch marker. Now this is where you can make the size adjustments to make it slightly bigger or slightly smaller. If you wanted to make it slightly bigger, you would just pull out less increases or keep them all if you want to keep them all. If you wanted to make it smaller, you would just pull out a couple more increases, and then the key to making it smaller is that you have more rows of just regular stitches. Now the thing about crochet circles and tubes is that once you stop increasing, your work will start to curl up. Sometimes it takes 3 rows for the curl to actually be noticeable. Sometimes it just takes an unintentional skipped increase and it'll start curling up. But that is how the fabric works. Once you stop increasing, it'll start to turn into a tube, and that is what we want. Now after I finish this round, I am going to hold it up to the template, but no longer the circle. The circle doesn't really matter anymore. What I'm going to do is fold it in half, and then I'm going to take the top part and I'm going to line it up against the top of the circle. And this is where we're going to work on the length. So in order to reach the minimum length, we have to work just from there all the way to the bottom of the template. And we do that by adding 1 stitch into every single stitch around until it is that long. It will be that long. Again, you can crochet with me if you're interested. If not, you can skip just until the very end to see what will happen. But I do want to add, in the beginning I was talking about how many stitches you would start with in order to create a cone shape or a flat shape. So where we folded the circle in half, it was fairly flat at the top because we started with 8 stitches. If I wanted it to be more of a tip toward the center of the hat, I would do 6 or 7, and that'll give me a little bit more of a tip just because of how the stitches work. But for the rest of the hat, I'm just going to put 1 stitch into every single stitch around, and I did include all the footage in this video if you want to watch it. So you can watch a turn from a flat circle into a tube, and there's even an option I think on YouTube where you can speed it up yourself if you wanted to. If you want to skip it entirely, like I said before, I do have the chapter markers, or like the little markers at the bottom and in the description, so it's totally up to you. And if this is just a personal tip, if you ever have trouble falling asleep, I would bookmark this video and just watch this part. It is like 30 minutes long, and it's just the same motion going on with the hands, and it was putting me to sleep while I was editing it. So voiceover me will be back at the end of this section, but if you want to work with me, enjoy. If you want to skip, I don't mind. I'm not going to be upset. There's literally nothing happening besides just the beanie being made. But because it is the same motion every single time, that is why I think it's a really good TV project, because once your hands get the muscle memory down, you can pretty much keep doing the same motion over and over and over again. I noticed that it's helped me with my anxiety about feeling productive. Sometimes I feel like I can't relax and can't watch TV and I need to do something because there's so much left to be done. And crocheting a beanie like this really helps with that. It helps me relax, and then at one point I do get tired, and then I'm just able to sit on the couch and enjoy it. The stitch marker, again, super helpful. Lets you know what row you're on if you want to keep track of the number of rows. And if you do want to order the set from my shop, it is laminated, so if you wanted to use a dry erase marker or even a permanent marker to leave yourself little notes about the yarn and hook you used so that you can create them in batches, I've done that and it's super helpful. But like I said, I'll see you at the end of the beanie to show you how to finish it off. Surprise! Voiceover me is back a little bit early because I ran out of yarn, out of the purple yarn, so we're gonna switch to the teal in just a minute, but I'll show you how to do it the right way. So what we're gonna do is start the stitch, but we're not gonna add the last yarn over, except for with the new color. So I'm just gonna hold it to my hand like I would, hold it up next to the work. I'm going a little fast, but if you're advanced, then this really helps. If not, you can just tie a knot. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. But this is how you would do it to keep the top of the stitch the same as the bottom of the stitch. If you don't finish the stitch with the new color, then the top of the next stitch will be the old color and the bottom of the stitch will be the new color. And that's the best way to do it. Also, if you do it this way, you don't have to weave in your ends. Just crochet over them for 5 to 10 stitches, and I promise you they will not become unraveled, especially after you wash it. It'll just stay in place. But that's it. You can keep watching, and voice over me will be back at the very end. So it looks like we're done. I'm just gonna put the hat template underneath just to double check. If you wanted to make a slouchy beanie, like I've said before, you would just keep going. I would go at least 5 to 10 more rounds. But before we finish off, I'm just going to level off my row because we did work in a spiral, so it's not going to be a completely smooth edge. But to get from the half double crochet down to the bottom, I'm going to put a single crochet into the next 2 stitches, and then I'll put a slip stitch into the 2 stitches after that, and that's going to give me a fairly smooth edge. From there, I'm just going to finish off like normal, cut the yarn, and then weave in the end. I'm not going to chain one, I'll just pull out my stitch. And there's many ways to weave in your ends. The key is to go in 3 different directions, and I like to use a bent blunt tapestry needle to hide the tail in the back of the stitches. So I'm just going to figure out which way the yarn is traveling and what best direction to go into and which strands to work into. So this is going to be my direction number 2, and then I'll go in direction number 3 to hide it one last time. The idea is that the yarn can't travel around corners, so as long as you go in 3 directions, whether that's back and forth and back, or left down right, or left down left, it's up to you. Then I'm just going to cut it off, and there we go. Oh, we have one more part left because we still have that gap. Yeah, let's not forget about the gap. So if you want to hide the gap from a chain 2, I will preface by saying that I should have left a longer tail, but I'm still going to use my bent blunt tapestry needle to go across. So I'm just going to go crisscross until that hole is hidden, and that's it. So it's easier to show you than to tell you, but I'm essentially just going diagonally across, or across the circle, and then to the side, so that I'm covering the gap in the center as I work. I don't want to pull it too tight because it can mess up the integrity of the hat itself, and I would recommend leaving a longer tail than what I did, but that's it. That's it. This is how to crochet a child-size beanie using a hat template. If you have any questions, just let me know. If you would like to download the hat templates, they are available for free on my website. If you would like to purchase a set and have me ship them to you personally, you can check out my shop. And I really hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed making it. I love teaching. If you have any tips on how I can make these videos better for you, I'm always open. And I hope you have a good day. Be safe.